So here's my question. Why think of a world beyond the screen? What is it that, I'm sitting in front of 3 screens right now. I'm, happily. But I will admit I am also slightly frustrated with the screen. So why think beyond the screen? And what is the prospect that we will move beyond the screen? Because it seems to me that we are in this digital age where there may be at least a transition period where it's going to be much more of the screen-facing work, right? We are going to be fairly passively doing kind of digitization 1.0. We're going to be in front of these screens. So what do you say to that? And, how realistic are, beyond these smaller experiments, admittedly, that you have done in kind of augmented reality, how far are we from taking large chunks of work into the augmented realm where we don't need these screens anymore?
Very good question. And actually, the continuation of my individual story partially would answer that. And let's start from there and then expand a little bit. But as soon as I started this biometrics business unit at Futurist, after a couple of cases, like we continued working on Finavia and Finnair on what we call the walk-paced identification. And then we created multiple individual applications here and there, facial recognition payments, facial recognition smart vending machines, using all sorts of other elements of computer vision in general. But what we've realized is people are not interested in biometrics per se. I mean, like in any technology, people are interested in the value proposition. What is it in it for me? What part of my life it really enhances in a way? And that's when we actually started to see this pattern where what we are really interested in, or what we are really seeking for, this is not a new thing, but we are basically, especially in this era, quite wired to choose the path of least resistance. I guess that comes from due to the fact that we're being bombarded with so much information from so many different channels. Technology came to our life to make our lives better, and it did for sure in many ways, but also it basically brought all these noise that we have all the time around us. So what we realize is people are trying to get away from it, or maybe even shift the responsibility of parsing that information. Shift that responsibility to the service provider or to whatever it is that they're interacting with. And that's when we realize that the paradigm shift we're looking at is not biometrics. It's what we basically call the zero user interfaces. And then the name refers to here is that the fact that you don't need to actually interact with a physical interface like your screen in order to be able to access the information or access the services and products that you need. And this is not something we at Futurist invented. I mean, many companies have observed the same paradigm shift. Some people named it as beyond digital, ambient computing, Khan technology, as Google calls it.
Yeah, so I mean, the available technologies just in terms of chatbots, right? If you think about Alexa, Google Home, Siri, Cortana, those are, I guess, one instantiation of it, although arguably they haven't they're delivered fully on their promise. I mean, I was one of the beta users of all of these, but I mean, beyond some very pedestrian use cases, like alarms and stuff, and the weather, super useful things. Sometimes the recipe, although that hasn't really panned out so much because you still need the screen to see this thing. What are some of the more interesting kind of gesture-based or other types of interfaces that you think have some promise?
Sure, I'll answer that, but you made a good point in there. So we have the chatbots, we have these voice assistants that try to touch us, that aspect of what we are talking about here. But I guess it's important to define what constitutes a truly zero user interface experience in a way. So it has building blocks, and some of these individual technologies that you mentioned, chatbot or voice recognition, it addresses a part of. It makes that one single building block, but without the complementary parts, it's not going to ever deliver the actual promise of what we're talking about here. So throughout our work, we basically categorized like these building blocks under 3 categories. So the first one is the service or the product actually recognizes whom they are serving to. So there's this recognition of the individual that the system is interacting with. And nowadays, it's still mostly hidden behind passwords and traditional identification systems. So that's where, for example, the biometrics focus comes in. And biometrics is not the, of course, only technology that is able to do that intuitively, of course, but it's one technology within that realm. The second part, the interaction part. And that is where, for example, likes of Alexa, Google Home is heavily utilized. Interacting with a service essentially should be as easy as, grabbing a cup of coffee, as intuitive as taking your dog to walk or chatting with a friend. So that's why we see more and more applications of Alexa and Google Home around us. And the third part is the contextual intelligence. Think of this 2 things that I say, a grand door, a grand entrance to a palace. Without the palace itself, the entrance doesn't really mean anything. It's just you go in, oh, okay, that was cool, and then you probably get back out. So that the palace is the contextual intelligence. So once we recognize the individual, and once we know how to intuitively deliver that information, it comes down to what we deliver and when. And that is the contextual intelligence part, which heavily relies on what kind of data we have, what data we have access to and will have access to, and how do we get insights out of it and turn it into some piece of actionable and needed information for the individual.
Well, that's actually a very useful overview. So the question then is, where are we on each of these in sort of and also larger question than that, Tuğberk, when you think about these things, a very fancy word for this is sort of, we got to apply some design thinking to like really figure out what's going on. But truly, how do you even just define which use cases are ripe for this kind of disruption or simplification? Because I guess it's, now you have defined what the components are, but if you start trying to simplify something where the technology just isn't there yet on either of these 3 components, then you're in trouble. So you earlier talked about 2, pretty simple processes, and I'm sure, if you fast forward several years later, they're not still fully implemented, right, in airports around the world, either of these, steps that you talked about for the check-in. And similarly, there are parking, wardens around the world who still, at least they have different elements of what you described, and they're not all kind of one-stop shop to get this thing carried out. So how do you think about when you're thinking about new applications? Are you waiting for the end users to kind of come to you with that, or what is the stepwise process to kind of identify these things?
I mean, if you're ahead of the curve, and in my line of work, I usually am. The way it goes, and this is one of the aspects which I love working at a consultancy, we can actually make hypotheses around technology. So we could actually take one technology and try to figure out, where it lands in terms of applications. And we have that luxury because we don't have a single context. We don't have a single scope. We work with companies in insurance, in navigation, in mobility. So basically, we have the luxury to take any technology and look into it, try to make sense of it, and come up with a concept that we are able to sell or experiment. Of course, that is the starting point, that one of the enablers that we have. But the second part is, to answer your question, is technology maturity is an important aspect. So one of the reasons why, for example, we don't see traffic wardens are not, worldwide equipped with the Google glasses, is the fact that the smart glass technology is not come to a price point and then robustness where we could reliably produce these applications anywhere, and then people are able to use it. So technology maturity plays another role. And the second part is, if you want to achieve a zero UI experience, especially in the societal and business dynamics that we operated currently, and that is going to change, and we will get to there. You need to look into places where the ownership is not distributed. So this is very important. So an anti-example to this, what we have actually done at the Helsinki airport. So we created this walk-paced identification experiment there, right? The idea was that we're testing a future where you, as a passenger, register yourself. Once you buy your check-in, you take a selfie. It is attached to your itinerary, and then you come to the airport. And the checkpoints, you're not being stopped. The recognition is done while you walk from point A to B. And we only stop the people who do not have the access to actually be in there, right? So we reverse the process and take the stress out of your itinerary. You know why? But the problem with it is that for that to work at the airport, you need to have the airports on board. You need to have the airlines on board. You need to have duty-free people on board. You need to have banks on board, because they are the ones who actually provide, the payment systems at the airport. Who else? You need to have the border control on board. You need to have the tax office at the airport on board. So all of these people who make up the single itinerary of an experience. And that is not even enough. Like you basically talk to all the Finnish authorities and get them on board it, but your journey doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. Then you go land somewhere. So we actually need to get the other airport and all these officials on board as well in order to provide you the consistent level of experience that you signed up for.
And then don't forget, you need the individuals involved who are going to receive the service, right? Because biometrics is kind of troublesome that way.
Yeah. I mean, of course, when you start this kind of project, you have to have the basic assumptions that there is going to be a certain amount of people who will be receptive for this kind of services. Like that's the beginning assumption, and you validate it through the topic. But yes, so definitely. So you need to have all these stakeholders on board, and it's just. It's a tall order. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's impossible, but I would respect the authority who's able to orchestrate that ecosystem and put something out there very rapidly.